This is Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. An informal chats with top business moguls as they share their stories of failure and success in a fun and relaxed way. Get entertained, educated, and unlock the secrets to success.
Welcome to Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman. I am excited to have back our guest, Suzanne Harp. Suzanne, the last time we spoke, you were telling us about homeschooling the kids and your career in dancing and helping young people use dancing to build careers in business. You mentioned working with an organization from India and helping companies grow and transition. Your work is amazing. One of the things that stood out, and welcome back, by the way. It's
Thank
good to
you.
have you.
It's
I just went right into the conversation. It feels like it was just a minute ago that we had that conversation. One of the things you mentioned, though, in our last conversation that stood with me is the concept of these small companies, these business owners, and how they felt the business was their baby. Mm-hmm. And I ran into that once, and you made me think of it. There's so much pride and ownership that they have. They take years and decades and invest their lives. I was talking to a young man the other day that started a plumbing company, and it was just him and his wife. He's a veteran. He started the company, and he said he almost gave up, that he just didn't see a path to it to succeed. And at that point, I think they realized there's no way to go back to what we had before, that we have to make this work. There's no other option. So one of the companies I was helping, I approached him 15 years earlier. Before I started working with him, he had designed his logo. He was so proud of his logo. He had his website. He was so proud of his website. And when I spoke to him, I told him that the website is dated, your logo is dated. I didn't realize he designed it, though. Right. Your logo is dated. Right. We need to make a refresh. So I introduced him to a marketing agency, and we rebuilt the logo, and he was so resistant.
Yeah.
It was painful for me.
That's right.
To talk to him about a need to rebrand his operation. Mm-hmm. But it needed it. And then what happened is once he understood that we weren't out to either impugn what he'd done or to talk about what he'd done, because what he'd done and built was really good. We just wanted him to continue building on it.
That's right.
But it took him a while to get to that point. So tell us some of what you've done in helping owners get to that place. We have a lot of owners out there and founders that are just figuring out how to stay relevant, and they love their business so much.
That's right.
So we want them to succeed.
We do want them to succeed. I think the important lesson there is when a business owner is bootstrapping, making their own logo, developing their own content or whatnot, without those first initial fundamental building blocks, if you will, of the business, right, it's very difficult to go to a professional, what I would call a world-class marketing agency, and actually get them to where they need to be. The marketing agency is going to want to know what the thoughts are in their head, what the purpose is in the job, what problems are they solving, right, who in the community or who in the business world is going to consume the product if it's a B2B, or the consumer if it's B2C, who's going to be consuming the product. So that business owner, those first initial steps is so incredibly vital. It's like the organs inside of a body. And then the marketing agent comes out around and he puts the meat and the flesh and the hair and the lashes, if you're a girl, right, on the company. But whenever what I encourage a business owner to think about is you are advanced. Now we're trying to take you world class.
Absolutely. Now, what was really neat about that specific event is I introduced them to maybe 3 or 4 marketing agencies, but one agency really understood what was taking place. And I'd have conversations with her offline and say, look, he's struggling with this.
Yes.
Be sensitive.
That's
right.
And
she was so amazing at her approach. Yeah. So her approach to him was, what you've done is beautiful.
That's right.
You really have to. What you built is beautiful. And then she sent her team out to really get to know the organization, because the premise was, we don't want to take your business from you. We don't want to change your business.
That's right.
We just want you to help refresh. But she was masterful at it.
I love that. Yeah, that's great.
Now, you mentioned also that you had to rebuild your career after staying home. Mm-hmm. I'd love to learn more about what that felt like. Why did you want to do it, first of all? You were a stay-at-home mom for, 12 years,
yes,
I think?
Yeah.
I've hired a lot of former stay-at-home moms. They were brilliant, and I had a lot of resistance in some of these companies. And, what I had to describe to them was, we're looking for a certain talent. This is where we are on budget. There's this person here that has this gap in her years, but when you look at what she did beforehand, mostly it was a female. I had a few stay-at-home dads. but mostly stay-at-home moms. What you looked at in her prior career before deciding to stay home was incredible. Great school, great degree, maybe engineering, absolutely brilliant from her work. When you speak to that person in an interview, they still had it.
That's right.
They still had that understanding and knowledge. They still stayed current.
That's
They were just coming back into the marketplace, and they needed someone to at least give them a chance. And that's
exactly
what we did.
Right. And that is actually on my heart. And the next portion of my career is to help women get back in the workforce if they want to. Right. So you asked what was it like? It is literally like starting all the way over, knowing that you can run a marathon, but somebody thinks that you can run maybe a 440. Right. And you're like, no, I'm in this for the long haul. So you do have to do a lot of proving, which is okay. Getting started again in rebuilding and making sure that you are relevant was the biggest challenge. And that was the reason why I went to startups, because they don't have a lot of budget. So if I'm working, 60, 70, 80 hours, I know that I'm working basically for my second college degree or my master's, if you will, in business, but it's hands-on. So if we're working on a project, then I get my hands dirty from every step. If we were rebranding, like we did that with the company that we were talking about with India, I knew he came to me and he wanted me to work for him and he wanted to start a marketing agency.
Oh, interesting.
But I knew at that time we had just had the Richards Group go through their troubles after the Me Too movement. Right. And there was a lot of people from the Richards Group who then went on and did other agencies, and specifically here in Dallas. So I said to him, and after analyzing the company, what his strengths were, I was able to tell him, your real strength is in data. Your real strength that you already have. Right. Not only that, but everybody needs it. So getting back into the workforce and working with a startup like that really afforded me to run right next to the CEO, the president, the owner of the company. Not only help him bridge whatever cultural gaps there might be in communication, but also work on every aspect of the business. We hired a brand strategist who had launched more than 60 brands, and so she came on and worked with us. We were able to do short videos. We were able to say, what would it be like if you landed those Fortune 100 companies, and what do you need? We would go in and, I worked on all the presentations we did a team effort. Oh, wow. So nice. I got to put my hands into every bit of the business, which I think is interesting. If a woman wants to relaunch her career, I would suggest that she try as many things as she can, just like you would advise maybe a young 20-something to do that as well, and to really hone in on. There's a couple of things. What is your why? You asked that. Why did you do that? Right. My why was my children. My why was I knew I had more to give and more to offer, and I love business and I love building. So that was my why. It is hard, and the hard is okay. Yeah. The hard is the price of entry. Did
it take you emailing, calling 50 different people, 100 people to get the one yes? Like how much work was it in finding that first starting opportunity? The first yes I found were with my network, to be honest with you. Yeah. And so one of my girlfriends, she owned a travel agency when travel agencies were going out of style because everybody's booking on their own. But she found a niche, and she has like 16 agents that work for her. Nice. And so she allowed me to, just get my feet back in the, in business again. And then I went back to one of my old general managers that I worked for when I was 23, 24 years old, and she remembered me and loved me. So really tapping back into your network is incredibly important. Past that, when you're first launching, you realize it was, again, the hearken of the digital age and social media. And I felt like LinkedIn was blue waters. Yeah, okay. So every time I reached a CEO or a business leader on LinkedIn, and I figured out when to do it, those off hours, hint, hint. Right. They would respond back, especially if it was a thoughtful message that was specifically saying what you felt like their need might be and how you might be able to fill that gap. So real quick, that is an interesting point you made. So reaching out to the CEOs of companies in the off hours.
That's right.
Tell me what you found, because I think here's what I saw, particularly during COVID when it was kind of weird reaching out to people, but in general it's the same way. A lot of times if I need to reach someone, Sunday later in the day when they're starting to get ready for the week is a really good time. They're online checking their email. They're not in meetings all day.
That's right.
So tell us more about what you found.
If you find that they are somewhat active, especially on LinkedIn,
right?
As long as they're as long as they're present there, moderately often, then you'll get into their message, right? I'll tell you my favorite story about LinkedIn, though, was with the Indian company that I worked with in the first day. So it was pre-COVID, and we were told that we wouldn't land a Fortune 100 company.
Right.
I had read a book by Jeb Blount. He's a sales leader, and he's fantastic. And he had quoted Art Vallely from Penske Logistics, who he did sales training for.
Right.
So Thanksgiving, talking about the off hours, I messaged on LinkedIn Art Vallely what I knew he needed, which was data.
Oh, wow.
Because I knew just by speaking with Jeb, I know he both operated with HubSpot and Salesforce.
Right.
If you have two platforms for such a large organization like that, those CRMs are there to house data.
Right.
And I knew that data eroded at 30% every, so often. So I knew that he was consuming a lot of data. So I told him what I was doing and what I felt like his problem might be. And it was the Friday after Thanksgiving, if I remember correctly. It was Thanksgiving holiday. And he messaged me back, and it was very interesting. He said, I know I need help in this, and I know I've needed help in this in a long time. Let's take this offline. Here's my email address.
Oh, that's fantastic.
Yeah.
So that's pretty bold to email the CEO of an organization and say you have a problem, and then get a response.
But I have a solution for what I know your problem is. And it's not we're not calling him out. Everybody has that same problem, and it's still today.
That's interesting.
Yeah. So I was really trying to figure out how can with any business is what problems are we solving.
Exactly.
What problems are we solving? And I think that as business leaders, once we figure that out, that you really are there in service, whether it doesn't matter what industry you're in, but business exists to solve problems.
Exactly.
Right.
Now, I want to get back to the India in just a moment, but I was thinking of this, your transition back into the workplace. I wasn't a stay-at-home father, but I was very involved. And I remember I was centralizing this operation in supply chain management. I wasn't a stay-at-home father, but I was very involved. And I was in the middle of centralizing this really massive operation, the supply chain purchasing. And I remember going into a meeting with all of these executives, and we were walking through our strategy. And I was proposing this concept of centralizing and bundling some of our contracts. And I ended up using a word instead of bundling or some sophisticated business word. I used something like squish. We need to squish them together. And I was thinking, I think I was just at home watching a program with the kids, and we were probably squishing something, whether it was Play-Doh or something else. And I remember sitting there thinking, I'm not sure what I just told this group of business executives, but I don't know if you've seen the Haribo commercial, the gummy bears, with the pro athletes, and they're eating the gummy bears, and they're talking like a kid voice.
Oh, how funny. No, I have not seen that. Yeah.
Oh, my gosh, it's so funny. But that's how I felt when I sat and thought about what did I just say in this meeting. And everyone moved along without interruption in the discussion. But I suspect you probably had a change in your vernacular and word use from kid 100%. Talk to adult.
That's right. Well, what was interesting, I think, even whenever we decided to homeschool, there was a reason behind it. And I felt like the education system had departed from that classical, elevated way of even communication.
Right.
So whenever we were raising the children, and even today, you'll see that my boys will slip into, like you're saying, more of a relaxed way of speaking because of football or whatnot. And yesterday we were at the table, and so it's those. Your point is perfect, because even today you have to remind yourself, what audience are you speaking to?
Exactly.
Even yesterday, my son, my third, said something, and it was so not elevated. Let me put it that way. And my daughter and I looked at him and said, if you want to continue this conversation with us, it's going to be an elevated speech.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Okay. So when you're speaking to your audience, if you're in an executive board meeting, I am most often the only woman in the room.
Right.
So I do have to be incredibly careful of how I come across. And it's not that it's me particularly, it's society, and how does society view women in a workplace, or how does society view somebody who has this long, if you will, vacation or whatever from the workforce, whatever they think that was. Right. But as you go back in and proving that you can add to the conversation, proving that you can add to solving the problem, it's incredibly important that your vernacular, that what you say is well thought and measured. Right. And I think that when you're, especially in finance, most of them, of course, have their MBAs, and some of them have their law degrees, their JDs, as we call them, and a lot of them are analysts, and they're very analytical in the way they approach anything from numbers to a meeting, and it cracks me up sometimes the way they set up their area in a board meeting. So you have to be very careful on how you approach. And what I think one of our wise psalmists said, those who say the least are often perceived as more wise. Right.
You know, it's funny. I was at an event with the CEO of Bumble. And she'd done a brilliant job, publicly traded. She's one of the youngest to reach $1 billion.
That's right. Yeah.
Absolutely amazing business leader. But she mentioned that she would always go to these investor meetings and a lot of men in dark suits. And she just decided, I'm here. I'm going to have fun with this. That's and so she told the story. She said she'd walk in with this bright yellow outfit on just to bother them.
That's right.
But sometimes I think her point is sometimes you just have to embrace who you are. And you show up to the meeting, and as long as you're prepared and that what you present makes sense from a business perspective, you'll be welcomed in.
That's right.
It's a lot of work. It's not easy.
It's not easy, but being authentic is I think, refreshing.
Right. It is.
With an elevated speech.
Now, you mentioned a story that we didn't really get to delve into. So this company you work with in India, it was right during the middle of COVID as you were starting to grow and build. Tell us that experience. I think it started right before COVID, and then you had to keep it going in the middle of COVID, and a lot of your teams were based in India. What was it like building? And for those that might not understand what was happening during COVID, I encouraged them to go and research it. From a business perspective, it was hard.
It was really hard. As we touched on earlier, 60% of the businesses that shuttered during COVID never reopened. Right. And we were determined, we didn't know those stats at the time, but we were determined that not be us.
Right.
We were a global company, and pre-COVID, remember, we spent 2 years launching the brand, everything from the logo to the website to hiring the right brand strategists to figure out what our problems we're solving. And so we were going full force. Most weeks we would be 3 or 4, meetings in board meetings with different executives at different types of companies, anywhere from a small law firm all the way up to, the largest logistics company in the United States. Oh, wow. So we had these really amazing opportunities afforded to us. Then all of a sudden COVID hit and everybody shuttered at home. Well, India was shuttered at home as well.
Oh, my. Okay.
What's interesting about India is, and beautiful and really is I would call the feather in their cap, is that they will have 3 generations in one home together. Right. So you have to give enough grace to your employees when they're at home that there's a lot of noises that are going on. Even during, and then of course we have a differentiation in our hours, right? There's 10 hours, I believe, difference. And so we're trying to conduct business meetings, and then you'll hear the kids in the background, and you just have to let it go. Right. You have to have grace for everybody and take everything down a notch. What was interesting, though, during COVID was all those same needs still exist. All the things that we were, thank goodness for us, those needs didn't stop. Right. We still had to help our clients solve those same exact problems, right? But then to pivot to figure out how we could service them, we really focused on, with all of our clients, what part of their business was essential.
Right.
Right. And with a logistics company, they were completely essential, right? They were moving things in the United States. But even with our HR companies or whatnot, what part inside of their business was essential? Focusing on what the problem was at hand and helping them maintain their company became our main focus. Right. So COVID was incredibly challenging, and I think mentally challenging for everybody. Separation or isolation, and CEOs feel that all the time anyway. Right. But But the isolation issues are really, they're huge. And people and students were kept at home. We had kids that were homeschooling right next to Dad who was, in business meetings with us. So we gave a lot of grace.
And so the company did well. So you had 2 years before COVID, and then you managed through COVID, and you still stayed. You didn't become one of those 60% statistics.
That's right.
Yeah, that's incredible.
Yeah.
And so the company's still surviving today, or is it sold by now? It's still surviving today.
They're actually now. I don't work with that company anymore, but what's interesting is the company I just left still uses them. So that contract I landed still exists. They are expanding now into Latin America. They are expanding. They're opening call centers. They're doing all kinds of things.
Amazing.
So the data that we worked on to harness and to use, they are now implementing and opening a whole nother piece of their brand. So it's really exciting to see them flourish.
And I ask whether they're surviving today because that was such a hard time for people from a health perspective, but even more so from a business perspective and keeping those, it was just a hard time. So the fact that they're still doing well and surviving and thriving is just exciting to me. Now, one of the items you mentioned in that discussion was the 3 generations at home in India.
That's right.
And how beautiful that is. I can tell you, I think I've missed the mark on some of it with my kids. But when I was young, we had several generations of families in the same community, not in the same home, but we spent a lot of time together, from Thanksgiving to our summer family cookouts. And it was just an amazing experience. And because I was the first grandchild, my grandparents, when we were all in the same home from both sides of the family, I called everyone mom. My mom, my grandmom, I called them mom as well. Yeah. So when I said mom in the household for Thanksgiving, I'd have all these people come running. Because
you were the special one.
I was. But it was just so delightful to have the knowledge transfer that happens when you have multiple generations within a nearby community. My grandfather was the entrepreneur.
Oh, I love that.
And so he owned a few businesses, and I worked for his business in the summers, and there were so many lessons. The one thing that I tell people today, his business was a kind of convenience store operation. We took a lot of cash, a lot of change. And if you've not counted pennies before as a part of the closing down process, you count hundreds of pennies and you have just a few dollars.
That's right.
It's a lot of work. We didn't have a coin counting machine.
That's right. I
was that
you
machine.
You were rolling
them,
right?
I was rolling pennies and nickels, and I can say that I prefer not to do that today.
That's right. Well, you learned a lot, though, right?
But I did, and that was the point. There's just so much knowledge transfer between those generations. So, interesting point that you mentioned. Now, you have a long career in not only knowledge within the community, but of community service as well. I think you said you've been studying policy and politics for a while, I presume, because you realize it has an impact on business.
That's right. Yeah, for 30 years. I do love how policy has derived, the thought behind it. And then the unfortunate sometimes when a legislature makes a law, if you will, I think the lack of foresight to understand in 15 years what does that look like for society. So those things I think are very interesting. Sometimes I believe that policy is made out of maybe an immediate need without understanding the long-term ramifications that it can have, especially on business. Right?
I agree.
So even when you think about the Federal Reserve, how it was put together, it's neither federal nor reserve. We always laugh about that. But if you look about the markets today, what's happening, and even what's happening, we are a global economy, and so all these policies, they affect every bit of business, if you will. Are we going to have trade wars? We don't know. Are we going to have tariffs? We don't know. And is one administration coming in or another administration coming in? Is business going to be more favorable towards one or towards another? Right.
I'd love to get your take on the Federal Reserve. Not to spend a lot of time, but most people don't realize it's not a government entity.
It's not a government entity, and it's supposed to be apolitical.
Right.
Right. But in my humblest opinion, of course they're brilliant. They're far more brilliant than I am.
So I have to tell you this. I talk about my daughter all the time. I actually had her to meet with the vice president of the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas.
Oh, wow. Fantastic.
Just to understand how it worked. I want to pump as much knowledge into her as I can.
That's right.
The fact that you brought it up is just intriguing.
Well, and I'm with you, and I encourage my children to learn how to multiply money. And they always laugh. They're like, I know, no, you need to learn how to multiply money.
Right.
right? And you need to understand how the Federal Reserve really affects, anything from these. So that in M&A, what we care about, right, is the cost of capital.
Right.
How much what are the interest rates? And if they raise interest rates, will inflation then ensue? And so these are the things I think are important that are directly downstream from the decisions the Federal Reserve will make, right? What does it mean to have inflation? Everybody ought to care about that. I mean, I care that my eggs now at Whole Foods are $9 for a dozen of eggs. It's ridiculous. I care that my gallon of milk is almost $7.
Right.
That hurts families. So everybody ought to know with a very practical sense of how the Federal Reserve affects your everyday life, because it absolutely does, because it affects every bit of business, right?
Right.
When a business owner is trying to borrow money, right, there is a cost to borrowing that money. Right. There's also a cost not to doing anything.
There is.
And so the measure of what that looks like, but those are just decisions that are made. And you think to yourself, how do you make a good decision? Well, you have to understand who's pulling the strings,
right,
and how those decisions are made. And we know that in every market, I believe people can make money. And so when you have that knowledge of how that works, you're more agile to move.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, you mentioned that there's a cost of not doing anything, and I must say that I think you've taken that personally, like you're actively involved in the community. So
Yes.
you've done great building a business, raising a family, being a great spouse, but you've also decided to become engaged in the community and make sure that you're not one of those not doing anything.
That's right.
Correct?
Yeah.
So you even ran for office. I know that I don't spend a lot of time discussing policy or politics
Right.
on the program, but you are living by what you just mentioned, the idea of taking action and trying to help other people in the community.
Yes. Well, I think what's interesting in running for office is, you don't always, obviously more people are not successful than they are successful. But if you do it right, then you earn a reputation that is not only believable, but it's authentic, it is trustworthy. And what I often said to someone is, you may not vote for me, but by the end of this process, you will trust me.
Right.
So what I love by it now is whenever we have other city officials that want to run, and you're able to give your advice, you're able to give your insight if they're running for school board, if they're running for city council, and the things that they ought to think about. Whether is that the right position for them to run for, right? And you and I spoke about this at great length. But when you're running for school board, you really ought to understand the budget. What does the legislator have effect on that budget? Right? Because the taxpayers, those are the dollars coming from the taxpayer. How much does Texas keep? Texas has one of the most beautiful economies, right? Governor Greg Abbott and the governors before him have done a really good job for us. But not only that, what is the curriculum? What are our children being taught? So, and is that the right position, or should you be running for city council? And every one of those positions, I believe, are equally important.
It is.
Right.
I had a chance to meet with a group of people who are professional football players the other day in their alumni association. And they mentioned that they were determined to get back to Texas because it supports business so much. So they're looking at their lives after their professional football career.
That's right.
And they say, we wouldn't live anywhere else. Texas has been really good for businesses. It's now the 8th largest economy in the world. 55 Fortune 500 headquarters are based here. It's an amazing place for business.
It really is. And I joke, if you can't do business in Texas, you can't do business anywhere, right?
Absolutely. So on a personal side, public relations and communications degree, right? Why public relations communications? It seems.
Well, what was interesting, so the University of Texas at Dallas at that time, they were really expanding. We didn't even have foreign language at the university at that time. Yeah, but it was really a math engineering school, and I knew I was not a math and engineering girl. And I needed to earn money and get out in the workforce. So I had previously been a history major, which I love history. But I knew at that point my heart had changed. I thought, which is kind of funny, I didn't want to teach, and then I ended up homeschooling. And I wanted to go into business. And so at that time, it felt like you needed to know why people were purchasing. What was the and how could you influence? Right. How could you influence business? And with a PR and marketing emphasis. The degree is interdisciplinary studies, and my counselor at the time said, I don't know where you're going to work with that kind of degree, but
right.
But we took a lot of classes in public relations, and everybody did with that major, and marketing and whatnot. But the purpose is how can you influence what the public was going to purchase? How could you influence policy? How can you influence? Well, it's influenced through what the content is that they're consuming.
The messaging.
So
my career in college started in engineering. Then I took a few courses in communications. They were so much fun.
Yes.
Because I realized there's a link between creating a great business. Here's what I found at one of the companies when I first left. Had a lot of engineers in the organization, did a lot of great research, but what they weren't good at is explaining the value of the research that they completed. The research was great, but they didn't communicate it well. And that's what those communication courses taught me how do you take something that's a great idea and then let the world know that it's a great idea.
It's the same thing in M&A today or anything within finance. We have a lot of really brilliant analysts, as I would call them. They come up through the ranks, and they're looking at spreadsheets. But very closely, after you're an analyst, you have to become a managing director if you're going to progress in your degree, your career. That MD role is a sales role.
Right.
Very often they will go back and they'll look at the analyst work, but they are not doing analyst work anymore, right? Sure. They're using it, they'll take it and they'll go to their meetings, but they really lean into a whole new persona, right? And so having those type of dual skills of being able to understand how does the public receive the messages that I'm giving continues. I believe everybody ought to understand those very vital skills.
So back to the personal side. We're almost at the end of the program.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have a favorite show or movie? Anything that I know TV. I don't think TV is big in your household, but
So I have two funny stories. I do love watching either a TV series or a really good movie. And someone suggested that I watch Your Honor or For Your Honor. It was too heavy. One episode turned it off. And so I went back to House of Dragons, and I'm like, I think I love that fantasy and if you're going to watch something, it to be artistically put together and truly, I'm using it for escapism, right? I don't need something to stress me out. So
that's how I feel with business. You don't want to go and watch an intense business movie per se. But I've been watching Suits though.
Oh, nice.
I know it's come back, I guess, on Netflix, and I didn't watch it the first go around, but it's been interesting. The idea of a guy not graduating from Harvard and being an attorney without a law degree was just intriguing.
That is intriguing. I love it. I'll have to watch that.
So not a Yellowstone fan yet?
I like some of it, but not all of it. Sometimes it's a little intense, I think.
Now, if you had to give a few tips to the young Suzanne Harp, the next business leader coming up today, so what would be any Business Decoded tips you'd give them about building a successful career?
Yeah. Take more risks earlier on in your career.
Okay.
Take more risks. And that means even if you don't make the dollars that you need to make, bet on the opportunity or experience to propel you. Do what you really love, and don't do something you're not going to enjoy. And sometimes you have to do a few different things before you can get to what you like and don't like. But what I have found is that sometimes children will do what they think is expected of them, which is okay because you have to take your wise counsel. But at the end of the day, taking risks and knowing that it's okay if you fall, you're going to be okay. But take risks early on so that even before you have a family, so that it's okay if you've get scrapes and bumps and bruises and black eyes along the way, right? So that's what I would have done, is take more risks sooner.
And what's the worst that can happen, right?
No, I know, right?
You go on and do something else.
Yeah, you lose money. But money is, I know you probably feel the same way. I think money is more of an energy than it is a item that is to be grasped. It is free flowing, and I don't think there is a cap on what somebody can earn or what your potential is. We put those limitations on ourselves.
We do.
Yeah.
Suzanne Harp, thank you for joining us.
Thank you. This is wonderful.
Thank you for listening in to Business Decoded with Ronnie Spellman.
Thank you for listening to Business Decoded podcast with Ronnie Spellman. Please be sure to subscribe and share and stay tuned for more incredible Business Decoded episodes.